Idea Factory International has brought a lot of cute and fan-servicey JRPGs over to the West, especially on handhelds. You've got the adorable Neptunia parody series, Fairy Fencer F, and then you've got the gruesome, gory, horror, terrifying series known as Death and Request. That series has continued and ramped the horror up by a lot in its sequel. Here is my review of Death and Request 2 for the Nintendo Switch. The story of this game is about Mai, a young girl who's isolated with an abusive father, their conflict ending in a very bloody confrontation. Later, she's sent to an all-girls school for orphans in a religious town in search of her missing sister, only to find out that the town hides some very strange and horrifying things. Monsters stalk the town at night, girls go missing and die in gruesome deaths. She quickly makes a couple friends and ventures into the nightmare to find her sister and figure out what's going on. Now overall, this story is really well done. It's not quite the Sword Art Online horror fest that the first game was, but it's got some crazy twists and shocking revelations towards the end. It probably could have been sold as a standalone VN and not an RPG and still done well. Plus, the first game's bad end system comes back, so you can save it a dialogue choice and choose wrongly to see a gruesome bad end. Speaking of the first game, do you need to play Death and Request 1 before 2? I would definitely recommend that. A few characters around the halfway point and a ton of the final 2 chapters of the game have really heavy ties to the events of the first game. Plus, you get special avatar versions of all of the playable characters from the first game to use in this game. You're probably going to be missing out on quite a lot if you don't have knowledge of Death and Request 1. When it comes to gameplay, this is a turn-based RPG with visual novel elements. Now, just like Death and Request, the Nintendo Switch version has all DLC built in and it can be activated from the get-go. Ultimate weapons, costumes, items, the list goes on. And the ultimates can be used to pretty much replace every weapon that you get in the game proper. Those ultimates will still be strong when you reach the final boss in Chapter 10's true ending. Another thing we should get into is the weird way the Nintendo Switch version handles censorship. When this game released on PS4, they censored the glitch or transformation costumes for Death and Request 1's returning characters. The Steam version had a special poll that people used to vote to get the original uncensored costumes on that version. The Switch is a little bit of both. The character portraits are uncensored, but the actual in-game renders are. It's actually a bit confusing, almost as if they did it halfway and forgot to replace those in-game renders. Now, main progression and really a genre split is between the time of day. In each day or chapter, you have daytime where it is like a VN with events in various parts of the school for slice-of-life cutscenes between Mai and the other girls at the academy. But when you end each day and night falls, you have dungeon crawling through the town and surrounding dungeons for main story progression and fighting terrifying abominations. They likely did it like this to retain that feeling of swapping realities that the first game had that this one doesn't. And anybody who's played Death and Request 1 through the ending knows why. Dungeon trekking is pretty much what you expect from these Galapagos and Idea Factory RPGs, though puzzles are changed up. You navigate each 3D area with enemies roaming around that you can run into start battles, and you've got simple puzzles you gotta solve to navigate yourself forward. In Death and Request 1, these puzzles were in the form of impassable doors that you had to switch over to Arata's reality and progress story stuff to be able to get past. But in this game, there is no reality to shift to. Instead, you have to use character abilities like security cameras that make invisible items visible, allowing you to access treasure chests with keys, or simply looking at a combination lock code that is written on a high wall. Now, as you trek through these dungeons, you will find save points, and they brought back the camp feature, letting you go into a bit of a different area where character events can happen, and you can navigate through a shop, letting you upgrade pretty much anywhere you want. The dungeons are also a bit more interconnected. There's no real world map with different dungeons to go to, just a fast travel point to other save points you've already unlocked. And as the party gets bigger, you gain more abilities to open up paths in earlier dungeons you didn't have access to before. The battle system is mostly the same as well, just offering a few enhancements. It is turn-based, where you have free roam during your turn to move wherever you want in the battlefield, and you can stack commands together for 3 different actions in one round. This is really useful if you've got to heal or revive a party member and want to attack a boss at the same time. The knockback system also returns, allowing you to launch and bounce enemies off of the environment or party members for excess and overkill damage. Now that brings us to difficulty. 2 isn't nearly as difficult as the first game was, but many gameplay elements do make it strategic even if you use the overpowered DLC weapons. Certain bosses have counterattack options, making it so you can't just auto-battle your way through everything in the game. Auto-battle through those bosses and you will very quickly lose your party members because when they take a counter stance, you have to know to stop attacking until they lower it. But all in all, difficulty spiking is significantly more user-friendly this time around. That brings us to content and length, which will vary depending on how many of the optional slice of life events you do during the day, or if you just skip them to get more dungeon trekking. But either way, this game from start to finish will last you between 20 and 35 hours, again depending on how much of that optional stuff you do. And a second playthrough will be needed to see the extra true ending scenes that link this game further with Death End Request 1. Next is presentation, the weakest part of the Switch version of the first game. Visually, the game looks very similar. There's a pretty decent amount of blurring, and even comparing Avatar Sheena in this game to Sheena from 1 look pretty identical. Performance is where the biggest difference is. We've got the same options to turn off glare and shadows to improve the frame rate, but honestly, it is much better even with those turned on. Handheld mode in this game never got close to how choppy the original game was even in docked mode. I'm not going to say the frame rate is perfect because it jumps around the 20s and 30s quite a lot, but you're going to get so much better performance out of this even if you only play handheld. That's all I've got to say about performance, so let's go into battery life. Death End Request 2 gives the original model a battery range of 2 hours and 36 up to 3 hours and 54. The Nintendo Switch Lite gets a range of 2 hours and 42 up to 4 hours and 10. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 5 hours and 13 up to 6 hours and 50. And the OLED model gets a range of 5 hours and 30 up to 7 hours and 12. In conclusion, Death End 2 comes to the Switch with a great story that will shock and rip at players of the first entry. Now on the downside, there is still a fair bit of blurring with the visuals and the frame rate isn't perfect, though it's a big improvement over the original with more balanced difficulty and far less performance issues. Reviews to Go rates Death End Request for the Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. Feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.